The Buddhist term, dependent origination, while philosophic sounding, simply means that as everything is defined by everything else, nothing can be said to exist by itself. It follows that we do not actually have a self, despite our personal experiences, that I am myself and you are yourselves. From the start, Buddhism has said that we don't exist independently, as our existence depends on each other. I can think of myself as a Buddhist teacher because you are here to listen to what I am talking about today. This think of myself suggests that who I really am is only what I think I am. And so I don't exist apart from my thoughts. I didn't even name myself, of course, and there seem to be a multitude of others named Peter Schneider throughout the world. 2 of them reside here in our zip code. I once made a submission to a poetry journal editor named Peter Schneider, and he jokingly rejected, and I was jokingly rejected because he said that he had a personal rule never to publish himself. Anyway, we can easily get lost in thinking we are who we are when we only have words to define ourselves with. The importance of this is because we suffer from thinking that we are who we think we are. First, everything changes, Buddha said, but we don't want to believe this, wanting ourselves to be the same as we always think they are, even though, like everyone and everything else, we are always changing. Another way in which things change is clearly seen when decisions in our lives are based on our liking or disliking things or not caring about them, either way about them. These 3 hindrances of attraction, aversion, and indifferences in themselves are also sources of our suffering. For example, a few weeks after getting something that we really wanted, we may lose interest in it and find ourselves focusing on something else that we don't have. Such instances of dissatisfaction will be repeated until we are well aware that we suffer from our refusing to accept that we are always changing, and from not having things that we want or from losing them. Either way, it is because of our belief in the self. If we stopped wanting ourselves not to change, or didn't care about not getting what we want, or getting what we don't want, the me in us, the selfish self, would lose its power over us. Then it wouldn't matter to us whether we changed or if we didn't have our own way. Then whatever we did or didn't do would be fine. This need to come to terms with this self is reflected in Dogen Zenji's saying, to study Buddhism is to study the self. He followed this with, to study the self is to forget the self. Our practice is meditation, and Dogen easily could have said, to do Zazen is to forget the self. While we are watching our breath, or counting our breaths while sitting, we are also aware of thoughts coming and going. In this sense, we are studying what is taking place in our mind, if more by observation than analysis. We can see from this that the thoughts passing through our mind are not the mind itself. Indeed, even without noticing it, we recognize that our thoughts are not us. Indeed, we don't have a sense of self in those times when our mind is completely clear in meditation, or in work in which we are concentrating. It seems from this that not only do notions of self not occur when we are not thinking, but that the self itself may be a creation of our thinking. Dogen Zenji next said that to forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things. When we have ceased caring about the ego-centered self, we are able to give our attention instead to our world and to a newly found compassion for those in our world who are still not free from this self. However, in doing this, we still have attachments, albeit not with respect to ourself, but to what is in our world. This is proof that a sense of self remains with us. The we feel for others points to the truth of this. While we are now focused, in that stage, on what is outside of us rather than on what is inside of us, our sense that this is who we are reveals our still thinking that we are. Dogen added to this, when actualized by myriad things, our body and mind and the body and mind of others drop away. By our body and mind, we ourselves is meant, and by the body and mind of others is both the self of others and also the self of our world. When our two selves, the inner and outer, have dropped away, what is there is our true self, Buddha nature, or putting it in different words, complete, perfect enlightenment. This nature being in everything and everyone, we can see that others are ultimately no more in need of help than we are. That is, so-called enlightened persons are left with no one to compare themselves to, there being no one or thing that is not enlightened. There is not even a reason to have the word enlightened. For instance, were everything always light and never dark, there wouldn't be a word for either. So Dogen concluded with, no trace of enlightenment remains, and this no trace continues endlessly. In the Zen circle, in Enso, this final stage of practice is represented by the end of the brush stroke returning to the beginning of the stroke. For example, so you have a brush, the brush goes like this. Here, up here is enlightenment, and then the brush, when we go by enlightenment, and the brush comes back down, and it hits where we began. That makes the whole circle. Let me find myself here. Likewise, the 10th in the 10 ox herding pictures portrays a practitioner, someone who has, quote, has seen one thing through, unquote, as Suzuki Road said, and Mel Weitzman titled his book. When that practitioner comes, that practitioner has come down the mountain and is talking to children in this picture. As these examples imply, with the practitioner now free from enlightenment, the only differentiation between those at the start of practice and those at the end is that for the latter, this no trace continues endlessly. Remember, no trace of enlightenment remains, and this no trace continues endlessly. Soto Zen Buddhists prefer to use the term interdependent origination rather than dependent origination. For the teaching which says that we define each other for each other. For the fact that we all have Buddha nature puts us in the same boat together. It is one like the Yellow Submarine that Ringo Starr sang, "We all live in." While it may nevertheless seem like some on the boat may have better jobs than others, Suzuki Roshi pointed out that the big pots in a kitchen are no more valuable than small pots, as cooks need both. Our coming to help each other like this, our interdependency, is reminiscent of the well-known Buddhist parable that most of you have heard, maybe all of you, about the difference between those in heaven and those in hell. Residents in both heaven and hell are sitting across from each other at an endless table filled with appetizing food and drink. The only rule is that residents must use the 4-foot chopsticks provided. So if you're eating, the distance between the end of your arms and your mouth is at much 3 feet. So if you have chopsticks that go over your head, you cannot eat. Okay? Those who feed the person across from them are in heaven, while those who don't go hungry eternally. Therefore, what we end up understanding from practice is that nothing is more satisfactory than being interdependent, since our true nature is to share. Thank you. Here's Jane. I'm going to push myself over a little bit here. Here we go. Here we are together. Okay. Put Jane someone back here. Here we are. So, any comments or questions or recipes? Chris?
So, for the first time hearing that parable, I guess you could say, about the 4-foot chopsticks, it occurred to me that in order to eat in heaven, or rather, being in heaven, in other words, it's not just that you can't use your chopsticks to feed yourself, you use them to feed other people. A lot of people, I think, get that pretty like, yeah, we're on board with that. I think a lot of people don't appreciate that also being in heaven means receiving someone else's kindness. And I'm not sure, maybe maybe that's a particularly American thing where we're really gung ho about helping other people and very much opposed to or averse to being helped ourselves. And I don't know. That never occurred to me, but I think that's true. I think that's a thing that people also need to work on. Maybe, or just me.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I agree with you completely. Yeah, yeah, that's a very good point. That we have to be that we receive our nature, but we receive the kindness of others. But since the others define us and we define them, it's very, very natural to receive the kindness of others. That's the way it ought to be. Just as we give the kindness out, the kindness also comes in. That's a perfect world. Yes, Mike.
When you brought the circle up, I kept thinking of the old line, we're just running in circles as Zen Buddhists because we're trying to catch up with ourselves and, just run the circle. But in the earlier part of your talk, a thought came to me. Even though the concept of self, our self, does not exist without other things making ourselves, doesn't that self that we have to drop off have a use in the world of samsara, since we are dealing with people who still don't acknowledge that the idea that the self is empty and doesn't exist? So we don't want to abolish it per se, but like Dogen said and other teachers said, just drop it off. But it still has a use, just don't get caught up in it. Or is that a misconception on my part?
No, no, that's what the teaching says. But however, it can be confusing. Soto Zen or Buddhism can be confusing because it accepts as reality what we all live and experience in our whole lives as reality. It's just that we're limited. So in effect, what we do is we discover our limitlessness. And when we discover that, but however, everyone else has the same limitlessness. You've heard me say before about the Lotus Sutra, and in the Lotus Sutra, the Tathagata comes out and he gives a talk, and he's talking to gazillions of other Buddhas sitting on their own lotuses. Okay? But we all share that world together, even though we have our own world. So it is true, as someone brought up to me recently, that, when we die, the world dies too. But that world that dies, of course, is our own world. Of course, Buddhism also says, of course, the world doesn't die. I mean, there's a Big Bang, and whether that's the real answer or not, probably very close to it, who knows? No, all of that's there. So when we study Buddhism, we're trying to go beyond that and integrate our two worlds together. And it's a long and often arduous, not always, but often arduous journey. But of course, if you're making the Enso, and that journey takes, a lot of years, right, to go all the way, then of course there's no racing around in a circle, Chris, Mike. Yes, John.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the connection between our delusion of self and attachment to physical and non-physical possessions. The reason I'm bringing it up is I've been doing some reading lately on societies and our culture and other cultures, and how, at the beginnings of societies, there really weren't any ideas of this is mine, this is yours kind of thing. um, there the idea of a singular possession didn't exist. When Captain Cook arrived, to the Polynesians, he was taken aback because he thought that they were, stealing from him things from the ship. But for them, it was just, oh, he had come and he's, taking some timber from us and we're taking, they didn't have any ideas of possessions. And it seems that the ideas of possessions seem to propagate the idea of self. Can you speak a little bit about that?
I think it's very true. You know, in the case of some, I don't know about all, there's a lot of different American Indian groups, but Native American groups. But at least in the case, I guess it's anyway, Lakota Sioux anyway. When someone made a mistake or something bad happened or something like that, they would give away everything they owned. Every single thing they owned, they give away. And then, slowly or quickly, everybody began to give their things back to them one by one. But yeah, it's a very, very different feeling, because, possessions and possess, is it obviously we possess or I possess. That's always in there. Someone has to possess. And we're feeding that with our possessions, which of course we all have a huge bundle of in this modern world. But there's no reason that they should define us. They shouldn't define us. They're there, they're useful, but they don't define us. And if we don't have one thing or another, on the usual minor scale of things, it really doesn't matter at all. So yes, totally right, John.
Thank you, Peter.
Anyone else? I didn't write about this, but it's an interesting fact that I thought about too late to write about it. But dependent origination is a way of understanding that we don't have a self. And it's a negative thing. Just like the first two of the Four Noble Truths are negative. We suffer, and there are reasons why we suffer. The other two are, there's a way out, and here's what the way out is. That's the positive side. And our practice is rather similar, because when we first start to practice, we're more in that first part rather than that second part. But anyway, when we only go from dependent coordination to interdependent coordination. And that interdependent coordination is something that's positive, not negative. It's very positive. I wish I had said more about that. But anything, I use that, just one line for that, which was, we're lucky that we're able to share. Because sharing is, and giving, and as well as receiving, but particularly giving, when you give, it just comes back to you. You don't have to worry about it. It comes back. And that interdependence is a wonderful thing. It's not a way to prove that you don't have a self. It's a way to prove how wonderful the world is. If we could all live without our attachment to ourselves and to our possessions, etc. I seem to be wanting to talk a lot today. Anybody have anything else to bring up? Jane, anything?
I need a specific question because
We need a question, huh?
I just been following a lot of different strands.
Yeah, I had this kind of, there's a lot to grasp in one sitting in the talk, but okay. Yes, Mike?
This may be slightly off subject, but it was another thought that came to mind is, oh God, I just lost it. I can't believe it. Was this, oh God, I actually did. As soon as I opened my mouth, it just disappeared from me. But it was something on relationship with this interdependence that, oh, because of possessions and like what John brought up and stuff, it was like a thought came to mind is that, because we have an impression of ourselves and what we are, and we have certain expectations from things happening to us, that sometimes we'll look at something initially and say, "Oh, this is really bad for me. This is really this is going to mess up everything." And you just kind of forget about your feelings about it, and a little while later, it turns out it was the best thing that could have happened to you. But because we had this impression of ourselves, we thought it was a bad thing to happen. And so in a lot of ways, we can't judge ourselves because there is no self. And we get into situations sometimes where we sit there and go, wait a minute, oh, this is going to mess up everything I had planned. And actually it turns out to be very much more beneficial if you let it pan itself out. So that's kind of a sidetrack on what you were saying, but shows you how my mind works when I listen to these talks.
Yeah, sure. Yes, John.
There was something else you mentioned that for me is very important to my practice and kind of what I work towards. And you alluded to, in Zen, we're kind of working towards realizing that we aren't our thoughts and our feelings. And a lot of times when people find out that I meditate and whatever, and they're like, what are you trying to achieve with that? And it's, for me, that's really the essence of what, not that I'm trying, obviously this is antithesis to, we're not really trying to achieve anything, but I would think that, trying to be without an attachment to our thoughts and our feelings and a belief that that is who we are, I feel like is the crux of practice.
Yes, I agree. What we're doing in practice is we're deleting things. It's almost as if there were a perfect society, metaphorically speaking, we'd be a nudist colony. We'd have nothing. We have nothing to hide. And we often think about, well, what does Buddhism say to the real world? And Buddhism says, if you study yourself and thoroughly, or yourself gets studied by the practice, as it were, thoroughly, then the world as it is a world of peace. It's a world when people don't fight. And so we are trying to, in microcosms, develop that in hopes that somehow it spreads. Not that we're trying to proselytize, because who cares who does it or how it's done. It'd be wonderful if the world understood our true nature. So we can just give up Buddhism completely. It's the true nature. If we only not in a way not knew, but we're aware of, I guess would be a better word for it, then we would, all the problems would disappear. Actually, I mean, using the Judeo-Christian Islamic, thing, it would be heaven. It would be living in Eden.
But so the Buddhist translation of that is, we are in Eden. We are in heaven. It's just our delusions that keep us from the realization of that.
Yes, that's right. Heaven is not someplace else. It may be someplace else as well, but it is. Yeah, it is here. It can be here. Yes.
That's what my mother realized.
Okay, Jane, you got it. Jane just said a little thing to me.
I just was
Out loud.
mentioning to Peter, I told him about an experience my mother had when she was in the hospital and almost died. But at one point in the delirium, she ran around the hospital in her little nightgown and grabbed everybody she met and said to them, "We're in heaven. We're already in heaven. You don't have to work anymore. You can just rest." Just, and she was a very small, 5'4" size woman. I can only imagine what people thought. She said, but she was vehement when she talked to me. She was yelling at them, "We're in heaven. You don't have to work anymore. You can just rest." And she was taken back to her room.
She gave away the secret. Can't do that.
It's like the Belinda Carlisle song.
We're already in heaven.
Yeah, we'll make heaven a place on earth.
Right. That's good. So anyway, on next Saturday, we have Tova Green for our speaker.